All right, so let's get going with the second talk. We have Simon here. He's a designer and the founder of one of the web companies here locally in Zurich. Previously, he has also worked for Google, among others. And we are really happy to have him again here to talk about a gap. Let's see what gap is that.
Okay, thank you. I'm very happy to be back this year at the Frontend Conf, and thank you for coming. Okay, so here are the slides. Yeah. Okay, so this is a Gantt chart of my career since 2001. I studied at University of Bern, then worked at Swisscom Innovations for a while. Then I did my own startup, CMS Box. I joined Google in 2008, and then last year I came back to Zurich to work at my own company, Gineda. So as I said, I'm the founder and partner at Gineda. I do design strategy at Gineda, whatever that means. But today I don't want to talk about Gineda at all, but I actually want to talk about something, or something that is very personal to me, that I'm interested in on a personal level. And this is, as you all heard, the gap. And to explain what I mean by the gap, I let Ira Glass tell you about the gap.
Nobody tells people who are beginners, and I really wish somebody had told this to me, is that all of us who do creative work, like, we get into it, and we get into it because we have good taste. But it's like there's a gap, that for the first couple of years that you're making stuff, what you're making isn't so good, okay? It's not that great. It's trying to be good. It has ambition to be good, but it's not quite that good. But your taste, the thing that got you into the game, your taste is still killer. And your taste is good enough that you can tell that what you're making is kind of a disappointment to you. You know what I mean? A lot of people never get past that phase. A lot of people at that point, they quit. And the thing I would just say to you with all my heart is that most everybody I know who does interesting creative work, they went through a phase of years where they had really good taste. They could tell what they were making wasn't as good as they wanted it to be. They knew it felt short. It didn't have this special thing that we wanted it to have. And the thing I would say to you is everybody goes through that. And for you to go through it, if you're going through it right now, if you're just getting out of that phase, you got to know it's totally normal. And the most important possible thing you could do is do a lot of work. Do a huge volume of work. Put yourself on a deadline so that every week or every month you know you're going to finish one story. Because it's only by actually going through a volume of work that you're actually going to catch up and close that gap. And the work you're making will be as good as your ambitions. It takes a while. It's going to take you a while. It's normal to take a while, and you just have to fight your way through that. Okay?
Okay. So apparently there is a gap between our taste and our skills, right? So what we want is we actually want to remove this gap, okay? In more generic terms, we're actually talking about the gap between talent and mastery. And what's interesting for us is how we can close this gap and move from just having talent to master a craft. So one way, or if we want to think about this, we have to first understand what mastery is. So we need to have a closer look at the goal we're aiming for. To do this, or one way to do this is basically we can look at masters of our craft, right? So these are three of the most influential designers in our field, And I'd like to show you a little bit what they did, and maybe at the end think about what they have in common and what we can learn from them. So to do this, we need to go back in time about 9 years to the year 2005. In 2005, user interfaces looked something like this, right? I think most of you can remember this time where all these like crappy, bulky user interfaces were all over the place. And about at the same time, I switched from, no, it's not true, I switched way earlier, but I discovered an application on my Mac that looked like this. And this blew me away. This was like the most beautiful thing I've ever seen in my life, right? So this is an application that lets you organize your videos and your books as a personal library. And it's kind of useless, but I just indexed all my books and all my videos and all my music just to use this application. I was so blown away by this. And this is also the first time when I've seen something in what we today call skeuomorphic design. So the wood pattern, the real shelves and stuff is very much like real life. So this is was very inspiring to me. Then 2 years later, the iPhone came out. And again, I had this like moment where I was just blown away how great the UI looked and how much attention to detail there was in every single corner of the UI. And also what you can see here, it's at least the battery is very skeuomorphic, right? So this trend actually was then democratized by the iPhone. One of my favorite apps, though, was the photo app, because it was so clean and it doesn't have any distraction on this screen. It's just the content. That was very impressive, again. So it's just the photo and the camera and not much more to distract you. And then a couple of years later, when the iPad came out, again, the photo album app was very well done, right? It's basically did away with all the UI on all the Chrome. It's just content, and you basically interact with just the content. And then a couple of years later, I was very impressed with an app called Our Choice. It was basically a book that the company called Push Pop Press did for Al Gore. And this was also one of the first time I've seen such rich interaction that is directly tied to the content. So I'm going to show you a video of this application so you can get a feeling of how it actually works.
The book starts like this. This is the cover. As the globe spins, we can see our location, and we can open the book and swipe through the chapters to browse the book. Or we can scroll through the pages at the bottom. And if we want to zoom into a page, we can just open it up. And anything you see in the book, you can pick up with 2 fingers and lift off the page and open up. And if you want to go back and read the book again, you just fold it back up and put it back on the page. And so this works the same way. You pick it up and pop it open. But one of the coolest things in this book are the interactive infographics. This one shows the wind potential all around the United States. But instead of just showing us the information, we can take our finger and explore and see state by state exactly how much wind potential there is. We can do the same for geothermal energy and solar power. This is one of my favorites. So this shows When the wind is blowing, any excess energy coming from the windmill is diverted into the battery. And as the wind starts dying down, any excess energy will be diverted back into the house so the lights never go out.
Isn't that crazy, right? So David Pogue from New York Times said about this app, this is one of the most elegant, fluid, impressive apps you've ever seen. It's a showpiece for the new world of touchscreen gadgets. And he's completely right. So this was revolutionary for me as well. Okay, moving forward, I'd like to talk a little bit about Nest. Nest is a thermostat. This is something American people use to control the heat in their homes. And they usually look very ugly and are very dumb, right? So you can like move the temperature up and down. That's all you can do with them. But Nest is different. Nest is smart and beautiful. So again, Nest is one of the first really good implementations of the connection of the real world with the digital world. And it's no wonder that Google bought it for $3.2 billion recently. Okay, and then there is Facebook Albums. When Facebook Albums came out, it was the first time I've seen an album composed so beautifully and so simply with this, what we now call hipster grade, right? Everything you do, no matter what photos you upload, they just look good in this UI. So this was another thing I liked very much when I first seen it. And then talking about Facebook, there's this new app that they launched about, I don't know, a couple of months ago or last year maybe, called Paper. And Paper is a new way to discover news and updates on Facebook. And again, it does away with all the bulky stuff of Facebook. It's like an experiment. And I'd like to show you this.
Stories come in all shapes and sizes. They can be told with words or with a single picture. And how each story is told is as important as the story itself. Whether it's from a far-off land, a moment shared by a friend, the latest from the front page, or a cat-sized tale set in outer space. So we've created a way to enjoy your friends' stories and discover a range of new subjects. from familiar sources and fresh points of view, while letting you share the stories that matter most. Your own. Introducing Paper from Facebook.
It's kind of cool what they do with these videos also. So maybe you recognized some of the patterns we've seen before in the other app, Our Choice, right? And this is no coincidence, because all these things that I just showed you have one thing in common. And the one thing in common is Mike Mottas. Every single UI I showed was made by this guy. So maybe you didn't know that. You used all these apps, maybe, or maybe most of them, or some of them, and he did all the work for you. So it's great. I'm a big fan of him, and I follow him since like a couple of years. And for this talk, I also read a couple of things about him, and turns out that he started to be an interaction designer on the age of 15 when he dropped out of school. And then he started at OmniFocus, and he did the UI for OmniGraffle at the age of 15. So it's really impressive what he did in his career. I'm looking very much forward what else he will bring to our attention. Okay, so also another thing is that we've seen very beautiful infographics in the app for Our Choice app. And these infographics have been done, as far as I understand, by this guy, Brett Victor. He is a designer and developer, thinker, and writer. And Brett and Mike met at Apple. So they both worked at Apple. And they became friends, apparently, and they also worked together on Our Choice. And this is Brett's resume, as he also does information visualization, right? It makes totally sense to have a resume that visualizes the career a little bit. And it's also very funny if you have a chance to look at it closer, maybe after. He, for example, talks about the number of people he interacted with over the years, and there are a couple of gaps in it. And comments which are like, yeah, that was fun, not talking to anybody. And then later, no, let's do that, not again. So very funny guy, very thoughtful guy. When I first discovered him was when after I've seen this video from Microsoft. So in 2011, Microsoft released a video that got a lot of attention within the design community, and it was about their vision of the future. So Microsoft predicted how the future of the world will be in 2020. Okay, and this is what they thought of the future. Okay, when I first saw that, I was no different than most other people, and I was like very delighted by this vision because everything was like so clean and seamless and stuff, but not Brett. Brett, shortly after Microsoft released the video, wrote a blog post called A Short Rant About the Future of Interaction Design, right? And what he basically says in this blog post is that a lot of what he sees in the Microsoft vision is hands, okay? But not just hands, it's basically hands and pictures under glass. So a lot of fingers swiping over a glass. And so he did a little research about what we can do with our hands, and he found that the only thing that feels natural, that is similar to swiping pictures under glass, is to like hand draw, right? With maybe kids do that with color, or maybe you write something on a dirty window shield. But this is not something that is very widespread. Instead, we use our hands to manipulate things in the real world, right? So we can do so much more with our hands than just swiping pictures under glass. So I never looked at this in that way, right? So Brett basically helped me to understand that this is wrong. It feels wrong to draw a picture of or a vision for the future in 10 years where we still would use pictures under glass. So he believes in hands, but just not pictures under glass. So that was a great epiphany for me. And when we look what we have 3 years later, so 3 years after Microsoft released this video, we have smartwatches, we have voice-controlled UIs, we have Google Glass, we have self-driving cars, and gesture control user interfaces. So all of these things are happening as we speak. Of course, we still swipe, like I do with this presentation stupidly, but also there's this other movement of like exploring other ways to interact with computers. So this gives you a little understanding of how this guy thinks. So I followed him a little closer, and I discovered this other talk he gave, and I'm pretty sure some of you know it because it's really amazing. And I'm going to show you just a short sequence of this talk he gave about inventing on principle. Okay, so he says that if you invent something, you should do it on principle. So you should have a principle that informs your decisions and that inspires you to innovate. And his personal principle is that there needs to be a direct connection between the creator and the thing that he actually creates. And here he is going to show you what he means by this.
So here's my little guy. He can run around, he can jump, he can die. And the code for him is over here. So this code makes him run around, this makes him jump, this makes him collide with things. And down here, I've got some code for this little turtle. And the turtle's not doing much right now because I haven't finished writing his code, so I'm just going to do that right now. Say on each tick, his x position plus equals his direction times the time interval, 1/60th of a second, times some speed, which, I don't know, could be fast, could be slow. If it's negative, he walks backwards. And these are all ideas I can use for other enemies, but I think turtles are supposed to be slow, so that's a good speed for a turtle. And then up here, I've got some code that says when my guy collides with the turtle, he gets some y velocity, so he bounces into the air, and the turtle gets stomped. So that looks like that. And the turtle gets up after a bit. The problem is, I don't want the player to be able to get up here yet. I want the player to bounce off the turtle and go through this little passageway down here. And he'll have to go around and solve puzzles and whatnot to come back and get the star. So the turtle's too bouncy right now. Now, of course, I can just turn that down in the code, and now I can try it, but now it's not bouncy enough. And so while it's nice that I can kind of adjust the code while it's running, instead of having to stop and recompile and find my place again, I can't immediately see what I need to see, which is whether or not he can make that jump. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to bounce off the turtle and pause the game. So I pause the game, and now there's this slider up here, which lets me rewind through time. And now I can rewind to back before I made the jump and change the code to make them less bouncy. And now when I move it forward, it's going to simulate forward using the same input controls, the same keyboard commands it recorded as before, but the new code. This is not good enough. I need to be able to see changes immediately. I need to be able to see immediately whether or not my bounciness is correct. None of this stuff. And if you have a process in time and you want to see changes immediately, you have to map time to space. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to bounce off my turtle, pause the game, and now hit this button here, which shows my guy's trail. So now I can see where he's been. And when I rewind, this trail in front of him is where he's going to be. This is his future. And when I change the code, I change his future. So I can find exactly the value I need so that when I hit play, he slips right in there. So creators need to be able to see what they're doing. If you're designing something embedded in time, you need to be able to control time. You need to be able to see across time. Otherwise, you're designing blind. As I was playing with this, I noticed it's fun to play with gravity. So I can make gravity a little negative and he starts to float up in the air. And I can kind of play with that and try to get him to try to stay there. And you could probably make an entire game around just this mechanic here, this gravity manipulation. In fact, I bet I could fiddle with any part of this code and come up with an idea for a game. Even if I just comment out the first statement in the code, now my guy can't move left. He can only move right. Which sounds kind of silly, but Terry Cavanaugh actually made a beautiful game around that concept called Don't Look Back. Terry Cavanaugh, he made another really wonderful game, which you might have seen, called V, spelled as the letter V 6 times. And the way that game works is that you can't jump. Instead, you can only flip upside down, and you fall up instead of falling down. So it kind of works like this, that you'd fall on the ceiling, or you can walk around on the ground. And so you'd have these levels, which kind of look like this, and you'd kind of walk around, and you'd have to learn how to navigate the terrain like this. And so if you had like something like that, you wouldn't be able to jump over it. You'd have to like flip over, and you got an amazing amount of gameplay out of this concept. So again, being able to try ideas as you think of them.
So again, I was blown away by this, and I think you are too, or at least I hope. What happened after this talk was basically very interesting. So it was very influential, of course, and one thing that happened was that Khan Academy is an online learning platform. They serve about 10 million students a month with 300 million classes. Or they served more than 300 million lessons in general. So very big thing. And they hired John Raess, the creator of jQuery, to basically implement Brett Victor's idea to help students learn how to code. Okay, so this is what you see here. You have the same concepts that you have seen in the video where you can directly manipulate the code and you see what happens on the canvas right away as you manipulate. But again, after Khan Academy launched this thing, Brett was not amused. So he wrote a lengthy blog post about learnable programming. And he is referencing to Khan Academy, and here he's basically exploring what they did wrong and what they didn't understand. And in the blog post, he basically suggests a better way for students to learn. So you still have the same principles that you can manipulate the code on the left and you see what's happening, but at the same time, also there are educational elements on the right that explain the concepts of what you're doing, not just like experimenting and fiddling around with the code. So it's a much better way to learn. And what happened after this is even more interesting. So I think a couple of months ago, Apple released their new programming language, Swift. And they basically follow this principle as well. And they implemented some of the concepts Brett introduced in his blog post. So very interesting movements going on here. And it's all basically started by this talk of Brett. Okay, so one last thing about Brett Victor. He's also a game designer, and this video shows you how his brain works. So if you want to learn more about Brett and his work, he has much more stuff that he did on his website, verydream.com, and I highly recommend you to go check it out. And also read through a couple of his articles and papers. Very interesting. Cool, so the last guy I want to talk about is Pasquale Silva. He's like younger than the both other two. He's from Australia originally and now lives and works in New York. And what he basically did is an application called Keezy. And I'm gonna run you a short video about what Keezy is and how it works.
Wom wom, bamama, wom wom, bamama, wom wom, bamama, beaming on, but It's easy with Keezy. It's easy with Keezy.
It's easy with Keezy. I love it. So you can literally feel how much fun they had to basically work on this application. And actually, you have no idea how much fun they have. Much more than you think. So they built a big Keezy for South by Southwest.
Keezy started off as an experiment.
You had the very original idea of an app that could record and play back samples.
Jared was describing what a sound sampler would look like and said, hey, what if it had no interface but just big buttons to push? It was surprisingly fun for what it was, as primitive as what Keezy is, an unintimidating music instrument.
Now, like a year later, you've got a physical version that people are stomping on.
Blows my mind that people are having so much fun stomping around on something that looks like it might belong at like a children's playground.
It's only been out for a couple months, and we have this vision that is pretty expansive.
We're constantly experimenting with things. We've been playing with effects, sharing the samples that you make with other people.
And with Keezy, even though it's going to get more powerful over time, it's going to maintain that simplicity so a 3-year-old can pick it up and start playing with it.
It's addictive. I don't want anyone else to play with it, actually. I'm having too much fun with it.
Okay, so now you got the idea, right? So you might think now, oh, everything is like playful and fun, and they just like were lucky to do something like this, and that got such a good reception. But when you actually go and look a little deeper, you find very interesting things about Pasquale and the way he thinks. And again, I'm going to show you a short video about this.
The sound of a heater is a ghosty, peachy pink. Dogs are brown and purple. People named Melanie are pink. So you guys behind the camera are tomato red, dusty blue, mustard, and you're the color of a tulip. I have color synesthesia. Color synesthesia is this weird cross-wiring of senses. For me, it's when I associate anything with color. So names, faces, sounds, anything that triggers a sense can often trigger color. Keezy is a sound sampler. It is 8 colored tiles that you can record into and play sounds back with. So I started playing music at a really young age. Like most conservative Asian moms, she made me play music by purchasing a keyboard. It wasn't fun. It was just regurgitating music that was written, 300 years ago. Learning music theory about Beethoven's mom, how long Mozart's hair was. It wasn't colorful, it wasn't emotional, it just wasn't very creative, and I quit. We felt like we stumbled across something really magical, and at first it was us just recording fart sounds into the board and going. And then after playing with it for a while, we realized you could make beats and rhythms, and you could start making music with it. Very quickly, we saw that it was more than just this 8-tile fartboard app and more of an instrument. Right now, if you want to create music, it's all a lot of very intimidating technical software. I realized that separating all the samples with color was the most sensible thing to do with Keezy, not with a bunch of lines and grids and different shapes, but color. I like describing Keezy as the Play-Doh or the Lego of music instruments. You put Lego or Play-Doh into the hands of a kid and they have endless fun. You put Play-Doh and Lego into the hands of a sculptor and they can make amazing things. And we've seen that with really great musicians. Keezy has absolutely got me excited about music again. I think music has traditionally been reserved for musicians only, and music should be something that everyone can explore. Everyone's focusing on this prosumer world of music and audio and not really thinking about the beginning, how people get into music, how they can fall in love with music.
So watching this video, there was just something very interesting about the way how this guy talks, right? He's not just talking, he's like it seems to be very thoughtful. So that got me interested, and I researched a little bit more, and I discovered that he actually also is a writer, and he writes about things like transitional interfaces. So which is a post on Medium that is vastly successful, has a lot of reads and followers. And in this post, he basically explains the basic principles of animation design in user interfaces. And when you look at Keezy, it's no wonder, right? It feels so natural and everything is animated, but not just animated. Every animation has a purpose. So he talks about meaningful animations. And also, he thinks a lot about the tools he's using. So he analyzes what tools we have at hand today and how we could improve them and things like this. So apparently, he knows a lot about animation and animation design in user interfaces. And a couple of weeks later, after I read these posts, I discovered a video from a talk of him he gave in, I think, Australia, and I just want to run this to you.
So here's a waving arm, and there's two states. There's state A and there's state B, and they're keyframes. Or more specifically in animation, we call them the extremes. And when planning animation, we look for the bounds to capture the generality of the performance, the extremes. And in the case of interfaces, it'd be like state A or state B. They would sort of be the extremes. They're the storytelling poses or drawings, and they're the ones with the most contrast and the most information. So once we have them, we need the frames in between to soften them out. And let's see what happens when we let the computer put the in-betweens for us using A and B as the reference points. So here we go. We're moving in an arc between A and B, but it looks really stiff. And something looks really unnatural about this movement. I don't know if any of you wave this way, but it's not normal. So what's the reason? Well, it's linear timing still, first of all. It stops really hard and it changes direction instantaneously. There's no concept of slowing down and speeding up. There's no concept of acceleration and deceleration. It hits really hard as it changes, and it doesn't feel natural. So how do we fix that? Well, if we let a computer interpolate the positions, we normally get linear spacing. So here's what linear spacing looks like. But look what happens when we move this middle position. This is the halfway position or the breakdown. If we move that position and bias it more towards A and B. So here it is closer to state B, and we've sort of adjusted the proportions of spacing so it gradually compresses. And here it is closer to state A. So the ratio of compression is what you can derive if you start using an easing equation or a stock ease, like a sine ease or an exponential. And depending on the variables of the equation, you'll have a different type of fall off or a different type of easing. And this is what they look like in motion. So on one side we have closer to A, and on one side we have the breakdown closer to B. Or in animation terms, we call it the ease out or the ease in. So I've applied some easing to the arm, and it's easing out and easing in. And the soft cushioning feels organic. Still looks pretty stiff, right? So I've delayed some of the parts in the second example here. And the arms are moving with some delay. It's really floppy, kind of like Woody from like Toy Story. And by avoiding the effect of having objects arrive and depart at the same time, you really start to understand the weight and the form and the hierarchy of the object moving through space. So here's the same thinking applied to some abstract interface elements. So it could be a bunch of divs, list items, whatever. And they're moving in a linear fashion. They're stiff and they're lifeless. But often, this is about as far as we'll see animation introduced. So here it is with some overlapping action. And they're the same elements, but with some crafted keyframes this time. The spacing is designed. The cells ease in and out, and they arrive and depart at different times with the overlapping action. And we see that the whole list is now made of these parts. It's not just one solid parent view that's being slid across an axis linearly. So much of designing animation is about the intent, how and why something gets from state A to state B. So how else can we think about the nitty-gritty of getting from A to B? Where can we look for inspiration? Where can we learn from? Well, we can learn from the classics. I spent a good chunk of my childhood watching cartoons, and I'm sure most of you did. But I wasn't like a normal kid. I wouldn't watch cartoons just once. I'd watch them a few times, and then I'd sit down and watch them frame by frame, and it drove my parents insane. I'd watch movies, and some of them would take days to watch. But I learned so much by studying the classical animation principles. And the most famous are the Disney 12 principles of animation, which are pretty commonly referred to by all animators in the industry. Things like anticipation, an anti-action, or a wind-up to prepare for a bigger action. Cushioning or easing to make actions feel organic and natural. Squash and stretch, preserving volume and distorting form. And exaggeration for clarity. So that, of course, was from Roger Rabbit, one of the best animated films of all time, which I recommend watching.
Okay, so you can tell about the way he talks about animation and the way he thinks about all these things, and the knowledge he possesses about everything related to animation makes him such a successful designer, right? Not just the playfulness and the fun aspect to design, but also his great background knowledge. So again, check out his website. He did a lot more very cool stuff, from illustrations to animated reels. So it's very, very interesting. So now I'd like to make a step back, very short, and think about or discuss what we can learn from looking at how masters of our field design stuff and the way they think. So I actually thought a lot about this, and there are many things we can learn, but what struck me most is that all of them have a sense of anticipation. So they anticipate, as designers, a lot of things. So they anticipate the behavior of the user, for example, or they anticipate the emotion that they will trigger in users, or they're going to anticipate how this application will be received, the reception of in the market of a specific app. And they can do this based on their vast experience in their field, right? So because they have so much experience and they learn so much and they know so much about what they're doing, they can now start to anticipate what's going to happen and how their designs will affect people who are using them. So basically, my theory is that when you start your career as a designer or also any creative job, you have a lot of taste, maybe, but also talent, and you draw inspiration from a lot of things you see around you. But as you grow as a creative person, you start to move into anticipation a lot yourself. So in reality, when we want to close the gap between talent and mastery, it looks more something like this, right? So it's more like a gradual development over many years, I would say. Now, unfortunately, what I see happening all too often is something like this. So people who claim, yeah, I have 10 years of experience in my field, I'm good, right? And all they have is creative ego, but no inspiration anymore, okay? So experience alone is not enough, right? So there is something more that we have to do in order to achieve mastery in a field. And so this is like, I try to visualize this. So you try to anticipate, even when you start designing something, you always have assumptions about how your design will work. And if you stop there, all you have is an empty claim, right? And then the argument starts. The argument with the developer and the argument with your peer designers and the argument with the PM, and everybody has an opinion and nobody has a proof, right? So this is not enough. If you do just this, it's very hard to achieve mastery this way. So what you need, basically, to go full circle and grow as a creative person is a feedback loop. So you need to validate your assumptions in the real world and see whether what you anticipated actually behaves the way you thought it would, right? So, and the only way to do this is by getting feedback as much as possible. And I call this like a feedback stream. So you jump in and you want feedback as much as possible, all over the time. And every time you get feedback, it helps you to validate your assumptions, and you will learn over time what anticipations and what assumptions you have about something you do are actually behave the way you think, and which ones don't. So to do this is actually really hard, right? Because as a creative person, it's a very personal thing, and we sometimes don't like feedback that much, but it's very important that we expose ourselves to feedback. So what can we do to make this a little bit easier? And I think there are like 5 points. So the first thing is you need to love what you do, right? If you're not passionate about what you're doing, then it's very likely that you're not going to succeed. Because, again, it requires hard work. And the more you exercise and the more feedback you get, the higher your chances are to actually harvest the full potential you bring. Then the second thing, I guess, is that you need to connect with people. So surround yourself with people you admire. It's a very good idea to not be the smartest person in the room, right? So you can learn from the people you work with all the time. A very nice way to connect with people is to ask a question, right? So ask for advice, okay? That gets you in touch with people, and at the same time, you get feedback of what you're doing. And then again, learning through feedback. So building stuff, trying things out, experimenting, but not getting an attitude about it. But use the things you build as a way to get feedback and grow your skills. Then I think you should aim for perfection always. So good is just not good enough. But at the same time, I also believe that you should be relaxed about it. So don't get like stressed out about perfection. It's better shipped than perfect. But you should aim for perfection, right? But at the same time, accept that nothing you will ever do will be perfect. Okay, this is like a very important distinction. And then lastly, follow your dreams. Don't give up. Be persistent, and even if it's hard, and especially if things get hard and annoying, keep following your dreams. And with this, I'd like to close the talk with a quote from Mr. Kennedy. Thank you.
Thank you very much for sharing all this with us. Maybe we take one question and then go to lunch. Any question? Well,
where's lunch?
I have one question.
Okay.
So what is your strategy to deal with, let's say, harsh feedback?
Well, I just accept it as feedback. I don't take it personal. I try to separate my work from my personality. So when I get feedback, I don't take it personal, and that always helps.
And how do you do that?
Well, just switch the switch in your head and think about feedback as a way to grow and not being criticized as a person.
Thank you very much. Maybe the audience can still find you around?
Sure, I'm here.
All right.
Yeah.
So maybe if you have questions, you can talk to Simon later. Okay, enjoy lunch.